a world where the line between reality and the unknown blurs, where every step you take is watched by unseen eyes, and the chilling silence of the night becomes your greatest enemy. In the wilderness, every whisper of the wind, every snap of a twig could be a sign of something or someone lurking in the shadows. In today's chilling tales, we venture into two terrifying stories that will make you question the safety of your own home and the eerie forces that might be out there, waiting for you. First, we follow a man who thought the quiet beauty of his secluded town was his refuge, only to discover a sinister presence creeping ever closer. Strange footprints appearing in the snow, leading from the woods to his door, will haunt him long after the tracks have vanished. Then, we journey into the vast wilderness of the Pacific Crest Trail, where a lone hiker is stalked by a mysterious figure, someone or something stealing his supplies, leaving only footprints behind as a reminder that he is not alone. What is out there? And more importantly, what does it want? Stay tuned as we unravel these spine-tingling tales where the only certainty is that the darkness holds secrets, and the truth may be more horrifying than we ever imagined. The silent footsteps in the snow. Winter in our small, secluded town had always been an eerie kind of beautiful. The woods behind my house stretched for miles, an endless sprawl of darkened trees that seemed to breathe when the wind howled through them. I'd grown up there, playing in those woods as a kid, camping out as a teenager, and eventually moving back in my mid-20s when my parents passed their old brick house down to me. It was a place of comfort, of familiarity, until the winter of 2012. That was the first time I noticed the footprints. It was a Sunday morning, early, the sun barely peeking over the frost-covered treetops. My fiancée was still asleep as I stepped outside, planning to make my usual run for coffee. The cold air bit at my skin, and as I rubbed my hands together for warmth, something caught my eye in the fresh snow beside my truck, a trail of footprints. They weren't mine. They weren't hers. And what unsettled me the most was the direction they came from. The prints led from the woods, crossing my front yard in a direct line to the driver's side door of my truck. They didn't go anywhere else, not to the windows, not to the porch. Just there. And then, just as precisely, they returned to the woods, swallowed by the tangled undergrowth. I stood there for a long moment, staring at them, my breath misting in the freezing air. It didn't make sense. Why would someone walk out of the woods in the dead of night just to stop by my truck before turning back? I asked my fiancée about it later, but she had no explanation. Neither did my father, who had lived in this house for decades. Probably some drunk wandering through, he offered, but even he didn't sound convinced. I should have paid more attention. I should have known that was only the beginning. 2 years passed. The memory of that morning had faded into the background, a strange but ultimately harmless mystery. Then, in the winter of 2015, the footprints came back. This time, they weren't just by my truck. They were everywhere. I stepped outside that morning and my stomach dropped. The fresh snowfall had captured everything in perfect detail. Tracks circling the house, stopping at the windows, weaving through the yard. Someone had walked the perimeter of my home, multiple times. Barefoot. I felt sick. The prints had toes, individual impressions pressed into the snow, unprotected by shoes or boots. The sheer thought of someone walking around barefoot in freezing temperatures sent a shiver down my spine. My fiancée was terrified. She begged me to call the police, but what could I even say? That some footprints appeared in the snow. There was no crime, no proof of any threat. That night, I took my rifle and followed the tracks into the woods. The deeper I went, the more uneasy I felt. The prints split into 2 separate paths at one point, diverging in opposite directions. My mind raced with questions. Was there more than one person? Had someone deliberately tried to confuse me? I didn't follow them much farther. The sun was setting, and the last thing I wanted was to be lost in those woods after dark. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That someone, or something, was out there, watching. The police came the next morning, but there was nothing they could do. They searched for a while, but without any tangible evidence of a crime, they eventually shrugged it off. That was the last time I saw the footprints. Until this past year. It was January 2019. A new year. A new start. And then, just like before, I woke up to find the prints in my yard. This time, something was missing. My shed had been broken into, tools stolen, not valuable ones, just a few hammers, some nails, a rusty saw. It didn't make sense. If someone wanted to rob me, why not take something more valuable? I called my friend Theo, an experienced hunter. He agreed to help me track them down. Armed with his thermal scope and my rifle, we set out that night, following the tracks deep into the forest. It took hours. We walked in near silence, the hive. Cold biting at our faces, our breath fogging in the dim moonlight. Every so often, Theo checked his scope, scanning for movement. Then, he stopped. He didn't say a word, just slowly lowered himself behind a tree, motioning for me to do the same. I could hear his breathing change, his grip tightening on his rifle. I took the scope from him, lifted it to my eye, and looked. There were 4 figures huddled in the snow. They were human. At least, they looked human. 2 large figures hunched over the other 2, who were smaller, thinner. They clung to a nearby tree, their heads jerking around wildly, their movements unnatural. They were naked. And they were eating something. My stomach turned. I couldn't see their faces. Thermal scopes don't work like that. But I could see enough. They were devouring something raw, their hands tearing into it with frantic energy. Then, as if some silent signal had been given, the larger figures picked up the smaller ones and carried them deeper into the woods. We stayed hidden for nearly an hour before daring to move. The walk back felt endless, every snap of a branch making my heart hammer against my ribs. My fiancée was waiting when we got back. I didn't tell her everything. I didn't need to. She saw it in my face. We called the police again, but just like before, there was nothing they could do. Winter is coming again, and I know, deep down, I know that they'll be back. We need to leave. We need to leave before they decide they want more than just tools. Before they come to the house. And before I find out what happens when they do. The Pacific Crest Trail had been on my bucket list for years. Last summer, I finally decided to tackle a major section of it. It was a solo hike. Just me, my gear, and the wilderness. That was the appeal. For the first few days, it was everything I had hoped for. Endless stretches of trees, crisp mountain air, the solitude of nature. I kept my phone off to conserve battery, relying on my map and compass instead. There was something deeply satisfying about being disconnected from the world. Just me and the raw, untamed land. Then things started disappearing. First, it was my wallet. I tore apart my pack, searched every pocket, even retraced my steps for a mile back down the trail. It was just gone. I felt stupid for losing it, but shrugged it off. Then, it was my lighter, my Swiss Army knife, a few protein, then Stuxturim. By the 4th day, I knew I wasn't just losing things. Someone was taking them. The realization sent a cold wave of dread through me. I was miles from civilization, deep in the backcountry. Who the hell was out there with me, and why weren't they taking my rifle? I started to feel watched. Every so often I'd glance up from the trail, certain I'd catch someone hiding behind a tree or ducking into the brush. But there was never anyone there. That night, I tied my tent shut from the inside. I barely slept. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent my heart racing. My exhaustion finally caught up to me, and I must have dozed off at some point. Then, I woke up to footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, circling my tent. I didn't move, I barely breathed. I clutched my rifle, waiting, listening. The sound was unmistakable. Someone was out there, just beyond the thin layer of fabric separating me from the night. Then, silence. I lay there, frozen, waiting for the sound to return. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, when I couldn't keep my eyes open any longer, I drifted into a restless sleep. By the time the sun rose, I had made my decision. I packed up and pushed forward without stopping, determined to reach my car before nightfall. But by then, the hallucinations had started. Shadows moved at the edges of my vision. I stepped into a puddle that didn't exist. I heard voices whispering in the wind. At first, I dismissed it as paranoia, exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. Then, I saw them. Not clearly, never directly, but glimpses, figures slipping behind, trees, shapes shifting in the distance. My heart pounded in my chest. I knew I wasn't imagining it. The strangest part, they never got closer. It was as if they were leading me somewhere. I quickened my pace, forcing myself to ignore the creeping in dread that clawed at the back of my mind. I just needed to make it to my car, just a few more miles. On the final night, just before dawn, I woke up to find my tent unzipped. It was wide open. The rope I had tied was neatly coiled beside me. And just outside, in the dirt, were bare footprints leading away into the trees. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my gear and ran. The final stretch of the hike was a blur. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but I didn't stop. I didn't even look back. When I finally reached my car, I threw my pack in the back seat, locked the doors, and peeled. Out of there so fast my tires kicked up dirt. I never saw who or what had been following me, but as I drove away, I saw something in my rearview mirror. A figure standing at the edge of the trees, watching. I haven't been back since, and I never will.